Does every beer have a story? Our guest today sure thinks so. And that's how Paperback Brewing was born. On today's episode, we welcome Chris Cesnek and Brandon Monroe, co-founders of Paperback Brewing in Los Angeles, California. Chris and Brandon both hail from the marketing agency world, so you can just imagine how important marketing and branding is for them. Today we talk about how they developed their unique brand, how they market themselves, and the importance of maintaining brand consistency. Hope you enjoy the show. Brandon, Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
You are welcome. Welcome. I'm excited to talk about the LA beer scene and, more importantly, the main topic for today, but we'll get to that in a minute. In the meantime, what is LA doing right now with beer? How is the LA market treating craft beer?
It's a little wild, and it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around because we came into it during COVID and we knew it as consumers prior to COVID. We flourished during it with all the different beers that we did, and now we are seeing that buying accounts are, it's definitely with off-premise beer, it's not as much as it was, 3.5 years ago, even 2 years ago. But it's tough. Like we do a lot of new beers still, and people still want what's new. So it's been really hard to gauge for things like our core beers and whatnot, because that's kind of our real standard of, we want these everywhere, and there's still places that they only want the new stuff. Mm-hmm. That's kind of sustain.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, like we don't actually really know because we were never around before COVID. We were born in COVID. So we hear about the glory days pre-COVID when tasting rooms had lines going out the doors to buy beer and everything. And we had to combat COVID by putting everything into stores. Like that's how we stayed alive. It's just like Brandon said, was canning everything. So, I think we're seeing a lot of with the RTDs hitting the market, marijuana now legal in California, all those things are taking its cut into the beer scene. So we're trying to stay as innovative as possible and, keeping the products changing constantly to make sure that they're, um, appetizing to the customer.
No. Okay, we didn't come here today to talk about LA beer market or selling in California. What we came here today to talk about is brand identity. Mm-hmm. And I know that I really enjoy looking at you have a unique brand identity, and I really enjoy looking at your can art that comes out. I think it's edgy. I think it's sets it apart. Katie, how would you describe their can art?
You're gonna put me on the spot. It's cool. It grabs your attention. It's very visual focused. I love your guys' stuff. I'm personally a huge fan.
Oh, thank you.
I'd love to hear how you guys describe it. I'd love to hear what went through your mind and what considerations you were making, taking in while you were designing it. Like how much intentionality was there with that? Just unpack your thought process for me.
Yeah, well, when Brandon and I had to come up with a name for the brewery, we kind of had two rules. And one rule was that it couldn't be tied to any location because we didn't know where the brewery was going to be at. And the second part was that it had to be a name that could kind of tell a story or be a vehicle to continue a brand going along through the course of time. And we came up with Paperback. And what was kind of interesting was when Brandon and I used to brew in his garage, we would always say, you know what, every beer kind of tells a story. You have a beer and, you meet the love of your life for the first time over beer. You get a divorce over beer. You tell your family that you're having a child over beer. There's all these different times that we have stories, and Paperback really worked out really well for that. And I liked it as the creative director of the company to be able to consistently tell stories and really have no bounds to where those stories would go, right? So if you see when you're going through the brand of Paperback, it's very focused. We're not mean-spirited, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. And I think that's pretty much the the main vehicle of Paperback's brand identity. We also play a lot off of pop art, so we kind of make fun of pop culture a little bit. There's also a lot of influences from me and Brandon's childhood from the 80s, the 90s that you'll see if you do some deep dives into the Paperback brand. But really, it's just coming up with ideas. We try to push it as far as we can go. We say that we have this unapologetic story to tell, and that we just have a lot of fun with it.
I
Yeah,
love it.
totally. We can tell with the various. And I was always wondering where the story came from. I'd never heard that, how the name came up, and it's brilliant. I think it's very, very cool how you came up with the name and so on. So the prior relationship was Brandon. You were brewing the stuff. Chris, you were
We were
creative
both.
side.
We were both brewing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we built out what we always called a Breaking Bad style lab in my
Oh,
garage,
nice.
and had a full brew system in there, about 9 fridges, and we brewed every weekend and just talked. We talked for 7 years every weekend while brewing, and like, what is this going to be? And yeah, lots of brainstorming going on in there.
Yeah.
Once we got down to having to pitch the company to an investor, we had perfected the beers. We felt that they were as commercial as possible. And then we were going out looking for investors. We had to then brand it. Like, what is it? What are we going to sell them? Pretty much it's a given. Like, if you're in Los Angeles has a great craft beer scene. And if you're brewing in Los Angeles, you have to have good beer.
Mm-hmm.
But what's going to separate you from the other breweries that are brewing great beer? And that's when Paperback came around. We had maybe 100 different names, and Paperback always just kind of kept coming back up to the top of the list. At the beginning, I wasn't even a big fan of it. I was like, I don't know. I was looking for a name that was more edgy, but then we realized that we could have some base of a name that we could create the edginess off of, and that was Paperback.
Yeah. You mentioned you didn't want to take yourselves too seriously. Another, what I believe, a successful company who's done this is the Liquid Death guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm not sure if they started in LA, but I do know it's a bunch of comedians behind that brand. And yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
And so if you take a minute to read the cans, they're actually hilarious.
Yeah.
Super simple, hilarious, and just the basic. They're murdering thirst. I mean, it just makes complete sense.
Yeah, the founder himself was a art director, a creative director in advertising, like myself. And I think comedy is really hard to do in branding, and I think that a lot of breweries are scared. I think we didn't have anything to lose because it was COVID. We were terrified of this disease that was going around, or this, and we really had nothing to lose. So we just
Right.
kind of pushed the envelope. We opened with one beer, and Brandon and I sat there and said, what are we going to do? We have this beer that's coming out, and no one knows who we are. They don't know that this brewery's opening. They don't know where it is. Who's going to trust this liquid in this can? And so we created our first beer called What the Fuck, and we actually put fuck on the label. And the idea was that hopefully the label was so cool that when you went into the store, you'd buy one, drink it, realize the liquid inside was great, and then come back and buy a 4-pack. And that's kind of what started the whole Paperback unapologetic kind of brand. Like, we really didn't, it wasn't dialed in 100%, I would say, until maybe after the first 20 beers that we kind of realized, okay, this is the path we're going. This is what we're going to do. We had some weird beers at the beginning that didn't really make sense, that have been long since retired.
Have you experienced any drawbacks from being on the edgier side?
No, I think people actually find it refreshing. I think at the beginning there was a little bit. We heard some murmurs of some stuff, and like, who do these guys think they are? I think once we committed to it, people said, "Oh, okay, I get what they're doing." I think if you got to go full force and you got to commit to the brand, or it's not gonna work. As soon as you kind of falter off that line,
Yep.
people are going to not trust you anymore.
It's
And
inconsistency.
I'm sorry.
It's brand consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so once we had that, we really acquired the ability to just kind of go with our gut and have some fun with it. We've really never had anybody reach out to us or whatnot.
I think also my personal opinion on that is, we heard a few things in the beginning, like Chris said, but they weren't from beer drinkers. It was from a soccer mom at a store or something like that that doesn't even drink beer. She just sees something and, like what the fuck? I mean, I've got two kids. I've got friends with kids who are like, our kids can read now, right? We have this in our fridge. This isn't, but
Sure.
they said it jokingly, but at the end of the day, our market is beer drinkers. And so I haven't heard any pushback in the community from that side.
Yeah, we went in knowing that this is a 21 plus brand, so we can market it to it. And it's kind of, we also look at it as there's a lot of, you have video games that are ultra violent, you have movies that are ultra violent. You know, I don't think our brand is ultra violent, but it does have some edginess, a lot less edgy than some of the movies and television shows that are out there. So why is that fine? So that's how we kind of started to push the envelope with some of the imagery on the cans.
Something you said a minute ago that really piqued my interest was you kind of were dialing it in over the first like 20 or so beers. So
Mhm.
can you give me an example or some insight into your thought process while you're dialing it in? So like what kinds of things are you noticing that felt inconsistent, or how did you identify what aligned and what didn't align with your brand identity?
That's a good question. So I found that, so I was the original. So we have like an in-house artist that we hire, and how the process works is myself or me and Brandon will come up with a name and for a beer that we know that is being scheduled to be produced, and say it's Tucked In by Strangers. So that was a name, that's our IPA, Tucked In by Strangers. Tagline is they only break in to tuck you in. And it's kind of like it's a bed with a guy that's hiding in it, and all these guys in 1950s burglar outfits, like holding beers, sitting on the bed, tucking them in, right? And that came from a meeting. We were talking in a group and someone's like, "Ooh, that's awkward." I go, "Yeah, like being tucked in by a stranger." And someone was like, "Dude, that should be a beer. That's awesome." So then it's like, well, what does that beer look like, right? So I'll sketch it and then I'll send it to our artist who will then color it in and do whatnot. And then I'll design all the like the title treatments and the logos and all that kind of fun stuff. And in the beginning, we didn't have the money to really create the art that was coming out of our heads, right? So it was using royalty-free like vintage clip art, and I was doing a lot of Photoshop manipulation. They were more graphically designed than illustrated, and about 10 or so, it was getting harder and harder to come up with crazy ideas and the stories that we wanted to tell with the assets that we had. That's when we had to go out and find an illustrator. And that was somewhat serendipitous as someone reached out to me, who's a fantastic illustrator and guy and now a friend of ours. And we just work really well together. And I think that my ideas are a little bit more out there than he would. So we work really great that he can take my idea and then really just turn it into something that's paperback. So yeah, we were doing, again, we had one called what was the Rolling Stones cover? We had the Some Girls Rolling Stone cover, but it was like with our faces on it. We had like weird puppets with wings, like flying through the sky. Like all those things they were just odd, but not really telling the story. And telling the story was the big part of it. So now we feel like our cans are more of a full scene of a story that's being told.
Okay, thank you. That was insightful. So you feel like it captured maybe the edginess prior, but not the storytelling pieces that were really like core to what you wanted the brand to be.
Yeah, there's just limitations on what we
Yeah.
could create. It would have been really hard to create the story of Tucked In by Strangers with like clip art.
Sure. And I think that begs a good question, is that like every brewery has a brand identity, whether they've curated it themselves or not. Like everyone has an identity. But what advice would you give? So every brewery also has limitations. So what advice
Mhm.
would you give to a brewery who maybe is still developing or even learning to understand their own brand identity? Like what advice would you give there?
Yeah, that's, I think we call our, you know, our brewery is founded by artists. Brandon and I both worked at advertising agencies. So, that's our unfair advantage. We have something that's in-house, it's free for us, and a lot of other breweries either don't have it or they have to pay for it. So I think overall, I think that the number one thing is to be focused and commit to it. That's what we've done. I see that that was one of the best compliments I think we've ever received. I had a guy, I was working behind the bar. He didn't know I was one of the owners. And he came in and he sat down and he said, whoever created this place had a vision, and I think if you can stay within that highway of creativity, then I think that's a really good, whether you're edgy or not, I think that's a really good start.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll say, Brandon, do you want to say something before I chime in?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think this is the missing piece that you guys have figured out. It's the consistency. It's the repeatable, not letting go of the gas pedal, where I think some other brands, they're a little bit old and stale and they want to reinvent themselves and they pop hard on some release or event and then there's no follow through.
Mhm.
Right? Once you pop hard, you're talking about you need to pop hard every weekend
Right.
from there forward.
Yeah.
Or if you commit to being a live music venue, right? If you're going to go that route, you've got to offer really consistent live music and good
Mhm.
live music each week. So I think that's the one area where if you look at the brand identity of Paperback, you've never let off the gas. It's and I wouldn't say one is one upping the other, or you're not big timing the last style. It's just consistently great.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard work. I mean, it's hard in the sense of like you. I think there's an internal pressure on Brandon and I to always what's the what's the next thing. I think our consumer base thinks like, all right, what are they going to do next? You know, and we've definitely had hits and misses with labels.
Mhm.
Um, but we've also had 90 beers, 95 beers that we've created in the last 4 years. So, some are stronger than others, and then you don't know. Some of them we've done, and we're like, oh, this is going to be stupid. And then we put it out there, and then people love it.
Do, do you think it's possible for that 4-year-old brewery that's in this rut to re-identify themselves?
Um, I think it depends on how much people identify with their brand. I think people can always be, create some sort of rebirth, you know. Um, John Travolta did it, you know. So yeah, again, I think it's finding, I think in a way, if you've been around for 4 years and you want to recreate your brand or have some sort of rebirth, I think you have the luxury of seeing what's worked and what hasn't for you in the past 4 years, you know. And you can identify those pros and cons and kind of apply that to the direction that you want to go in.
Yeah.
I think too, one thing that I've seen as a consumer and as a business owner, the amount that people buy with their eyes was very prevalent to us in the very beginning. And so that's what really pushed us to just continue creating. And we wanted to do that anyway, so it worked out. As far as the beer community goes, 4 years in, it's about the beer. So I think that if a brewery wants to rebrand themselves, they got to go. I would assume they'd need to go hard on the brand and the marketing because the beer buyers, the beer snobs out there, their main target audience, if they're not already drinking that beer, to win them back over is actually pretty difficult.
Yeah.
But you can do that with great marketing because the number of people that have bought our beers, not even knowing it's paperback, they buy it because they like the can, you
Right.
know. But, anybody could do that. I mean, not any. I mean, theoretically, anybody could do. You know,
When you hear or see a logo refresh, is that is that reinventing something, or is that just a refresh?
To me, that's a refresh. I think it's design style changes over time, and
Mhm.
well, although paperback has a very 1950s, 60s pulp vibe. So I'm actually doing the exact opposite of what I'm saying. But I think for other different products, I think that, as style and design changes, people update their logos to kind of fit with the times.
Do you think that is like an example of someone straying from their brand, or is that just their brand evolving, or does it depend?
I think it depends. I mean, I think it evolves. Straying from the brand would be, you're all about birds and then now you're about skateboards, and then you make your logo like a skateboard. But that would be more of a reinvention if all of a sudden you were into skateboards, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what I've seen across the board is the logo refresh is like, oh, we're 7 years old. It's time to do a logo refresh. It's time to take those edges and curve them off, and or
Mhm.
whatever the times are. I'm not a graphics guy. I'm not a visual
Yeah,
guy, but we know lots of breweries that have been through. They're going through their second refresh,
right.
logo refresh now, and that's the extent of it, right? That's the extent of it. I think what we're talking about as far as like a brand identity reinvention would be like what you described, birds to skateboards, and then really trying to get after that
Right.
connection.
Yeah. I mean, for paperback, our logo, we tried to make it evergreen, like we don't want to refresh it. I think that's for me, that's where it's at. And, I think with, some breweries, I think they don't have their in-house art team or the finances to hire an ad agency to do, 17 to 40 logo designs and try to figure it out and do test markets and all that kind of stuff. As they grow, they start to change their identity a bit. With paperback, that's a custom font that we created. And we always say like a good logo you should be able to design in the sand with a stick, So we use that paperback P a lot. And we wanted that to be like synonymous with paperback, and that when you see that P, it's a paperback beer. For Bunny with a Chainsaw tap handle, it just says it's a pink P on it with the bunny figurine with the chainsaw, So that's the goal. But that takes time.
Yeah. Can you talk to us about your thought process behind Bunny with a Chainsaw? How was that born?
Just random idea. I think that's one of the ones where like, oh, this is kind of cool. Let's do this. Then the idea was to put it on a pink can. So it's really a very, very kind of minimalistic label. It's just a pink background with a bunny with a chainsaw, and it just took off like fire.
Yeah.
It's just cute little Easter bunny with a chainsaw. If you scan the can, there's a QR code on the back. It tells a story about how he got the chainsaw. His parents were captured by the evil farmer and they were cooked in stew. And he
Mm.
got a chainsaw out of the shed and cut the farmer up and then made farmer stew.
Love it.
Is that common for you? Do you have a lot of QR codes on the?
We have on 3 of our cans, we've done it. We do it on the core beers.
That's awesome. I love that idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, Bunny with a Chainsaw was one that was just it has been a huge success for us. And I don't want to say it wasn't as calculated as we wanted it to be. It was we with the pink can, it just stands out on shelves.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I see a picture of it right now. That's great. All right, so let's shift to marketing. Let's shift to marketing the brand, right?
Mhm.
talk to us a little bit about your approach on how you market these 21 and up themed beers, themed styles.
Well, one thing about Paperback is we don't really have a huge marketing budget right now. We're going through all the same issues that the industry is going through. All the marketing is done in-house, and we use a lot of Instagram ads. A lot of it, we have a great cult following, so we rely on our Paperback fans to kind of spread the word as well. Um, we um, we throw events, um, and well, what else have we been doing, Brandon? Do you know off the top of your head?
I mean, the events are there's so many beer events like um I'm totally blanking when all the breweries come. Um, I guess they're just called beer events, like LA Beer Week, things like that. You know, the kickoff thing where there's 90 breweries at, and you know, those are kind of good because you get a lot of people to try it, but they're also drinking so much that day that I don't think that you really pull a whole lot away from it from it. But you know, some of the things that we've done at Paperback have been nice. You know, I think that our biggest hurdle has really been uh, is just how many people there are in the world or in Los Angeles, and how do you get to them all? Because I mean, Chris does all our marketing and he puts a lot into it, and we still have people that show up every week probably still that are like, "Oh, I live right down the street, never knew you were here." You know, so we've done email campaigns, we've done like snail mail campaigns, the Google ads, the Waze ads, the Groupons, like, you know, all these things to try to grow it more. And you know, social media seems to be where everyone's learning about stuff these days, yet how you still can miss a bunch of people is still a work in progress, you know. Like I had a couple months ago, there was a couple that came in and I overheard that it was their first time, and I went up to them and said, "Hey, I'm going to buy you a beer. I just want you to tell me how you ended up here."
Mm-hmm.
And they were one of those. We live half a mile from here, never knew it was here. They just happened to drive by and just curious what they saw, the silo down the street, and they just ended up there by mistake. And I'm like, okay, how could we have reached you? And everything that we've done is exactly that, yet we still didn't reach them, you know? So it's, I don't know, it's complicated.
Hmm.
Having the marketing and the visual backgrounds that you do, how much stock should a brewery put into the rule of 7 or the rule of 5, whatever it is, where you've got to communicate your message 7 times before it's heard?
Hmm. Um,
I don't know that rule, but
let me think about that one for a second. I mean, coming from movie advertising in my background, we felt we had 2 to 5 seconds to get a message across. And one of the things that with I see it firsthand now, because before I used to create art for a movie that would go up on a website or go up on their Instagram. So I didn't really see the analytics, and now I see the analytics with our stuff. And, you know, my big concern is fatigue. So whether you have to show it to them 5 times for them to get it or 7 times, I see the first time I show something, huge numbers. And then I'm doing the same thing. I'm repeating it. And then I see the fatigue. So now over the last, like, I'd say 6 months to 12 months, I've been really starting to look at the analytics of Instagram and seeing where that drop off is. Because you don't want to lose followers because they're seeing, a new beer come out for the 7th time and jamming up their feed, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Um, in terms of, the paperback brand, I think that's where you're going to see versus a product, which I'm talking about. That's where you're going to want to kind of get that brand out in front of people, whether it's buying with a chainsaw, tucked in by strangers, checks who wear leather. I think all of that is just reinforcing that rule of 5 or 7.
Yeah.
When you're designing things to go out, do you have like pillars of your brand that you're falling back on and kind of testing anything against that you're creating, or does it all just kind of live in your head through the years of experience that you've had with your own brand?
It's pretty much the latter. I think one of the things mostly about paperback is that we do a lot of stuff because it's fun for us, right? It's been successful in terms of the brand, but a lot of the stuff, like I just did a post this morning for tax day, and I designed something in 30 minutes just to kind of get it out there. We're doing an all day happy hour, and I think the idea of paperback, there's a common thread of the paperback theme that goes through everything, but the art kind of changes a lot. It's somehow not cohesive, but cohesive, if that makes sense. So, we definitely have, I would say that we actually don't really push like on the Instagram our core beers. That's more for like events, new beers, new beer releases, fun things that we're doing, one-offs. Um, the core beers are more communicated through like our sales team. So we have point of sale stuff that goes out with our 4 salespeople that are will do banners in stores, we'll do window clings, we'll do cutouts, we do all different types of things for like Bunny, Tucked in by Strangers, Capiche, those different beers that are our core beers. I feel like the Instagram is a little bit more of a playground for us on social media.
Sure.
That's insightful.
So back to the fatigue, because I've always been in the camp that you're working with consumer packaged goods, and if we look at the national global brands, right, they're relentless. They never let off,
right,
and they continue to push it. And I understand that the craft consumer is a little bit different, but as we evolve into 2024, right, it's not uncommon to find a brewery that opened up taproom only to now have a kitchen, to now be offering spirits and cider and wine. So as this kind of evolves, and certainly the nationwide just food brands, restaurant, hospitality brands, they're in your face every single day. I'm wondering if craft can take just a sliver out of that playbook to remind people.
Well, I think for us, I think what you're talking about, you're right. I think with our limitations on our marketing budgets, that's where we're not doing those types of things. I would love to have billboards up and down the streets of Ventura Boulevard and magazine ads if people still read magazines. I think for us, we've seen where our main platform is Instagram. There's just different rules that we have to follow until we can get to that point where we're, doing what Budweiser's doing or what Stone is doing or what, Modern Times or whoever is doing,
Yeah, totally. I get it. Interesting. Cool, guys. Well, I appreciate the time we've had today, and this was super insightful on how you've developed the brand and stayed tied to the brand. Where can people learn more about Paperback?
You can check us out at paperback.la. You can also follow us on Instagram at Paperback Brewing. If you're in the Los Angeles area, we're kind of off the 5 freeway in Glendale, so right on the edge of Los Feliz Boulevard and San Fernando. And you can also find us in Trader Joe's.
Nice.
That's a flex.
Yeah.
Well, in Southern California.
Round of applause from me personally. I love that. That's awesome.
Great, guys. Thank you so much again for all this insight. It was very good. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the True Craft Podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you are just dying to know what Chris and I look like, you can head over to YouTube for a video recording of the show. Links to cool information about our guests and other fun facts can be found in the show notes. This podcast is sponsored by Small Batch Standard, the premier financial agency built to serve the craft brewing industry. We help craft breweries grow profits through outsourced accounting, tax compliance, and growth consulting. Visit sbstandard.com today to learn more and request a discovery call.